Hold on. I thought I clicked slideshow. There we go. All right. Then let me just minimize this little thing here. Okay. All righty. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And for those of you that know me, you know this is a topic I'm really passionate about. And I did I gave a talk at a conference actually in March, and if you see the dates there, it was right before everything got really shut down with COVID. So we were fortunate that this conference in particular didn't get canceled. So I met some really amazing farmers there, and it was a grazing conference specifically. So for the purposes of this talk tonight, we're going to focus mostly on the regenerative grazing aspect of the whole regenerative agriculture topic, which, as you can see based on that video, is a pretty broad topic. There's lots of different areas to focus on with the food forests and the cover crops and no-till and all those different processes. But I hope you guys learn a lot, and I hope you can help kind of make these connections between your food choices and not just your health and how you're impacting your body, but how you're impacting the environment and different ecosystems. So I'd give a little background on myself here for those of you who actually even do know me and are my current patients. You may not know that I wasn't always in the healthcare field when I started on my educational journey. I was actually on a path to conservation work. So I'm originally from Colorado, and I started my biology degree back in 2006. And I had a focus on ecology and environmental studies. So this is my current office where you see me now, right? But in the picture, that was my old office. I was outdoors all the time, and this was one of my favorite work sites. This was up in Breckenridge, Colorado. And we were working on saving this endangered wetland area from the ski resorts that were kind of cutting off the water supply to this area. Anyway, feels like a past life, but it was something I was also very passionate about. And, you know, through different life events and kind of a change of heart, I decided to get involved in nutrition and get into the healthcare field. So in 2012, I moved out here, got my master's in nutrition and integrative health. Carrie and I actually went to the same school. She went through the herbalism program, and I did the nutrition integrative health program. But we both wound up here at the same practice at Crossroads. And we work under Dr. Warren Ross with a group of other doctors. And Lynn, who's on the call tonight, is our amazing director. And we're very fortunate to be here. And I'm very, very appreciative that they're giving me this opportunity to talk to you guys about this, because they understand how critically important this is with the topic of regenerative agriculture. So interestingly, my focus on regenerative agriculture didn't grow out of my ecological work. It was out of my clinical work that I became interested in that field and that topic. Especially when I started looking into what does nutrient dense food really mean, and what's going on with our food system and soil health, and how's it all connected. So Fred Provenza, who I will talk about a little bit later in the presentation, is an incredible researcher. He's written a fantastic book called Nourishment. Again, I'll tell you a little more about that later. But he gave a talk at a grazing conference. He's been studying herbivore behavior for many, many years. And he was really making the connection between ecological health and human health. And he said the doctors of the future will be ecological doctors. And essentially what that means is doctors, again, that are able to make this connection between human health, our food, how it's grown, and how that connects to ecology. And then I saw that talk and I thought, well, I'd already kind of been dubbing myself as an eco-nutritionist based on my background. So that, of course, really resonated with me. And that's how I came up with my little title. So we're going to talk a lot about meat, of course. And, there's so much controversy over whether it's good or bad for the planet and human health. And I get lots of, articles. You guys email me, my patients ask me questions like, I read this about, plant-based burgers being healthy and better for the environment. There's a lot of debate back and forth. And so I hope to kind of give you a lot of the science and the facts to help you get through, dispel those myths and really get through to what's the truth. But this saying right here, it's not the cow, it's the how, is really popular in regenerative agriculture. It's not the cow that's the problem, it's how it's raised. So again, all these different headlines are so confusing for people, right? The debate just keeps going on back and forth between, do we eat meat, do we switch to plant-based meats? And then the health concerns are always out there. This was a recent study in February. Eating red meat and processed meat hikes heart disease and death risk. So, and you know, I've even been coaching patients sometimes for a year or more, and they're still questioning, should I really be eating more red meat? Should I be eating more eggs and dairy and all these things high in saturated fat and cholesterol? So it's confusing. It's a very confusing world. So we're gonna talk about it and break it all down and get into the science of it. So we saw the video, you got that nice little primer on what regenerative agriculture actually is. And maybe some of you have heard that term, maybe you've heard it from articles you've read or from me, or maybe it's a new term, but it's really important to understand that as a foundation to what we're talking about for the rest of the presentation, because your food choices are really driving what can happen with restoring grassland ecosystems. And so before I kind of like just dive into this a little bit, I want to draw your attention to that in the corner in the lower left. Thriving grasslands can capture CO2 from the atmosphere more effectively than any other functioning Earth system. And that's pretty impressive if you think about it. Like, a lot of focus goes to the rainforest and the degradation of those type of ecosystems, which is also extremely important to protect, but our grasslands are dying across the world, and we're not hearing a lot about that. And one amazing way to revive and regenerate them is to actually have animals on the land and grazing them properly. So there's many aspects to regenerative agriculture, which you can see, or, you know, to really restoring these ecosystems. You can see that in this diagram. And I borrowed this from a company called Force of Nature Meats. And I'll give you information on them and too. I borrowed several of their diagrams. They were kind enough to, you know, give me even more just recently that I just recently threw into the presentation. So they're beautifully done. They explain everything quite well. There's all these different parts of an ecosystem that are needed, right? The sun, the rain, and then proper grazing of ruminant animals. So ruminant animals have special stomachs that are designed to eat grasses, not corn, not soy, not leftover Halloween candy and all the other junk that gets trucked into feedlots to be given to these animals that are in factory farm settings, right? So we're trying to really encourage people to make choices about their food that support regenerative agriculture and move us away from factory farming, industrial farming, where animals are locked up in cages or locked up in feedlots and given all these foods that are not natural for them. Furthermore, getting them on the land just gets this whole process, this whole beautiful process going of, you know, restoring grasslands so that you have biodiversity, you restore biodiversity to the land. Again, the urine and the manure, which was mentioned in the video, helps to fertilize the soil. Having the animals on the land with their hooves helps aerate the soil so it actually doesn't become impacted. Again, it has to be properly managed. So overgrazing of the land is bad too. And then you have this really important aspect of soil biology and soil carbon. So just like the video mentioned, we can sequester a lot of carbon down into the soil if we're reviving these grasslands and restoring the microbial life too within the soil. So that's how it's kind of all connected. So the basic message is we need animals back on the land and we need their grazing to be managed properly. And this is another great infographic from Force of Nature again. And again, these graphics are just beautifully done because they're very clear and easy to understand. What you're looking at is carbon emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions more accurately, from different protein production, I want to say meat because Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger aren't actually meat. But conventional beef is definitely one of the worst, right? This is a huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions from animals that are locked up, feedlots, factory farm style agriculture, right? And then you have Beyond Burger, Impossible Burger. They're still not, you know, they're emitting greenhouse gas emissions. They're not doing anything to sequester or help truly save the environment. Yes, they're a reduction from conventional beef, but what if we can just go a step further, way further, and do the better thing, which is to sequester carbon into the soil. And that's what you're seeing here with Force of Nature. The study that was actually done at White Oak Pastures in Georgia on a really amazing farm with Will Harris's farm. 3.5 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions are sequestered approximately for every pound of beef. And that was what they found in this study. So, you know, why does this all matter? Well, you already got the basic idea that this impacts ecosystem health and planetary health, but these numbers are pretty, you know, scary. It's a wake-up call for all of us. The FAO, out of the UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization, has reported we have 50 or 60 harvests left before all of the world's topsoil could be gone, which actually, I believe this statistic came out about 6 years ago. So we probably only have maybe 54 harvests left or less. So that's essentially years. That's not much time until our topsoil's gone, and we need soil. 95% of our food comes from soil. Then we get into the nutrition aspect of it. Vitamin and mineral content in our food has reduced by up to 90% over the past 2 generations. So, you know, it's crazy to think about. And this varies quite a bit based on the food you're looking at and, you know, where in the country, but up to 90% reduction in our vitamin and mineral content, just because we've so badly degraded our soils through factory farming. And so at this current trajectory, the impact of climate change will be devastating for our agricultural system. So again, our best tool to reversing the greatest issues our civilization has ever faced lies in how our agricultural system is managed. Properly managed livestock is one of our greatest solutions to rebuilding our soil. So this is really why I view farmers as healers. You know, healthcare practitioners, we're not really healers. We're here to be facilitators of your healing process and guide you and give you information and educate you. I view farmers as really, truly putting in an immense amount of work, a tremendous amount of work to provide us nourishment. And they go so underappreciated all the time. So eating is an agricultural act. This is one of my favorite quotes by one of my heroes, Wendell Berry. He wrote this amazing book, The Unsettling of America. It's really a reflection on what has happened to our agricultural system, especially in the 1970s when big ag came on the scene and really started to you know, pump up the whole industrial ag system, wanted to scale everything up. And this greatly impacted rural areas and small scale farmers. So his book, I feel like every American should read that to learn what's happened, what's really happened in this country and how this, you know, this move to industrial farming changed our culture and our health and our ecosystems. So eating is an agricultural act. Everybody eats. So we're all involved in agriculture essentially. And I always like to take a step further and say agriculture is a health-related act. So on the converse of that is every farmer is also involved in healthcare. And that's why I say they're truly healers, because they provide us our nourishment, but the food they produce will have an impact on our health for better or worse. How they farm determines the nutrition of our food, the nutritional value of our food. With consumers, every bite you eat is supporting a certain type of agriculture as well, for better or worse. So we're also going to talk about nutrient density a lot. And I like to start out with talking about what the USDA currently has in place for guidelines. And most everybody remembers the old school food pyramid, you know, grains and pasta, bread, all that stuff at the base of the food pyramid. And then the USDA came in and, you know, tried to revamp it. And now we got the My Plate right up here in the right-hand corner. And so if you go on their website, you can actually see what they promote as nutrient-dense foods. And for the most part, you know, there's some decent guidelines, right? Vegetables and fruits, beans and legumes, grains. They do only specify that half of them should be whole. Fat-free dairy, lean meats, eggs, and oils. And they're still promoting things like margarine and soybean oil and canola oil. And I think most of you here are savvy enough to know that those type of fats aren't healthy. If you've worked with me or Carrie, we've educated you a lot on that. There's still some confusion about the meats and the dairy at times. So we're going to talk about that and why we firmly disagree with these guidelines. You know, Harvard came in and tried to tweak the My Plate a little more and make it even healthier. they kind of went in the opposite direction in some ways. You know, they say to limit milk and dairy. They did say to eat more whole grains versus refined, and they also did clarify with vegetables, you want to stay away from the potatoes and French fries. They don't really count. But they're still promoting some oils like canola oil, and telling us to limit red meats and cheese. And this is kind of what they agree on at the end of the day. No red meat, dairy, and limit your processed meats. So before we get into that and talk about what's really ideal, I think defining nutrient density is important. So we hear this term a lot, and there's a lot of confusion about what it actually means. So it's classically defined as the concentration of nutrients per calorie of food. So I often give an example. If we have a slice of white bread in one hand versus a cup of berries in the other hand, let's just say they're about calorically equal, which has more nutrients? Which one's more nutrient dense? And it's obvious most people are going to say the berries, right? They're going to have way more antioxidants and fiber and vitamins, minerals. But then if I have a cup of berries versus an ounce of red meat, a little piece of red meat, they're about calorically the same. Which one is more nutrient dense? Which one has more nutrients? And that's where the debate gets interesting. And what I like to say is, instead of kind of like choosing one over the other, let's consider that they're both nutrient dense in different ways. And so we have to look at how we actually define the nutrients in that definition of nutrient density. What nutrients are we actually even measuring? Are we looking at macronutrients, which are the fats and the carbs and the proteins? Are we looking at micronutrients? It's all the vitamins and the minerals. Are we looking at phytonutrients? And phytonutrients are all these amazing plant compounds that can help protect us against cancer, control inflammation, even help nourish our microbiome in the gut. So all these different nutrients have to get factored into that definition, and sometimes they're not. But at the end of the day, we know the standard American diet is calorie-rich, nutrient-poor, low nutrient density, and we say it's time now. Me and Carrie and these other nutritionists that are promoting this kind of way of eating more balanced diet is nutrivore diet. And not even just a balanced diet and having variety, but making sure it's from a good source, good quality food, that it's phytochemically rich plant foods and biochemically rich animal proteins through regenerative agriculture. That is how you get high nutrient density. So this picture is like a really beautiful example of a diet with lots of variety, lots of different tastes, lots of different flavors. The more you have variety in your diet, you're really, really increasing your likelihood of getting more nutrients into your diet instead of limiting yourself to a restrictive diet. So this is a really interesting study. The research, on nutrient density is kind of, I don't know, it's a little sketchy. This is probably one of the best studies I found out there so far to really assess nutrient density in a wide group of foods. So if I were to ask you all to think, and I can't really see the little chat group here, so we can't interact on this at the moment, but if I were to ask you all to think about what would be the most nutrient dense food if a group of researchers took everything from meats to vegetables to dairy to eggs, and they assessed them all based on their vitamins, their minerals, protein, fiber, essential fatty acids, antioxidants, which of those groups of foods do you think would be at the top when it comes to nutrient density? Again, high nutrients based on the amount of calories. A lot of people tend to say fruits and vegetables. That's usually the #1 answer. Let's see, can I see the little chat? I saw something pop up in the chat. Well, basically, it's not fruits and vegetables, it's organ meats. And again, those of you that are my patients, you already know this, but organ meats completely blow everything else out of the water. Shellfish and fatty fish come pretty close. Lean fish. Vegetables, of course, are still high up there. And eggs, poultry. We haven't even gotten to fruits yet. Legumes are up there. Red meats, milk. Now we have fruit, nuts, yogurt, cheese, and of course, whole grains, potatoes, refined grains at the bottom. So again, those of you that are my patients, you can kind of see now why I encourage you to get away from grains and to eat more animal-based foods, other plant foods that have more nutrient density, because you can think of grains as being really kind of nutrient devoid relative to other foods. So organ meats, liver, they always top the list. They're loaded with so many nutrients, and we'll get into that in a minute, like what specific nutrients. So it's a great study, still has its limitations. The list of nutrients that they actually looked at are off to the right-hand side. So proteins and fibers, different types of fatty acids. DHA right here is a type of omega-3 fat, some B vitamins and minerals. But what the study doesn't really consider is the quality of the animal products, right? Were they pasture raised? Were they conventional? Phytochemicals maybe weren't looked at. Terpenes, alkaloids, antioxidants, phenols. Again, these are different plant nutrients that help protect us against cancer, inflammation, heart disease, protect the brain. There's lots of other missing nutrients too, different types of omega-9 fats. Some of the B vitamins are missing. The nutrient density score is actually lower for high calorie foods. And so dairy ranked a little low, but dairy has some pretty unique nutrients. You know, vitamin K2 you don't find in a lot of other foods, but you will get it in some dairy, some vitamin A as well. But, you know, just because a food is high in calories, if it has a lot of unique nutrients, shouldn't necessarily get a low nutrient density score. And then bioavailability and absorbability of nutrients is also not considered in this study. So iron is the classic example of this. Iron from animal foods is in what's called its heme form. And in that form, it's much better absorbed than the iron from something like spinach. So if the above factors had been considered in this Milo study, then it's possible some of the animal foods, and maybe even some of the plant foods too, may have been ranked even higher if we'd considered things like quality and phytochemicals and such. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Most of you know about the micronutrient testing, and you can always reach out to us if you want to learn more about this test and how you can get this done. But essentially, this is a blood test that lets us assess your individual nutrient deficiencies. So this is kind of how we here in our clinic look at nutrient deficiencies in our patients, and then guide you towards certain foods to eat and different supplementation. So it's a wonderful study that looks at your intracellular nutrient status, kind of what's actually getting into the cell, and it's unlike any other test out there. So that's how we assess it on a human level as far as nutrient deficiencies. And I'm kind of going to go down a little path for a minute on digestion, kind of divert here, and then we'll come back to our other topics, because this is an extremely important topic that comes up a lot, is gut health. And I pull this diagram up all the time for my patients and kind of explain what's happening with leaky gut. You hear this term going around all the time. In the literature, in the medical community, we refer to it as intestinal permeability. But leaky gut, in a nutshell, is when you have this barrier right here. These are the small intestinal cells. That's the cells that line your small intestine. This is kind of everything passing through the gut, and this is your bloodstream over here on the other side. And in a healthy gut, everything here is intact, right? They look like little bricks right next to one another. And we call those tight junctions in between those cells. It's a strong, healthy gut. You got a healthy mucosal layer in here, which produces a lot of immunoglobulins. It keeps your immune system strong. And then you have good microbiota diversity, lots of healthy bacteria and low level of pathogenic bacteria. But in an unhealthy gut, this barrier becomes degraded for a large number of reasons. Maybe too many antibiotics, poor diet, toxins, chronic stress, chronic sleep deprivation. There's so many things that impair this gut barrier. And then things start to leak through, food particles, toxins, and it sets off inflammation in the body. So, you know, healing leaky gut is critically important as part of that foundation of a gut healing protocol. And there are different vitamins and minerals that play a key role in that. And gut healing in and of itself is a huge, huge, huge topic. We could talk for hours about that, working on upper GI support, down to what's going on in the bowel with something like leaky gut. But right now, just for the purposes of this talk, I'm just kind of tying this into some of the nutrients specifically that you're going to find in animal proteins that are related to gut health. So on this slide, this is from SpectraCell as well. And what I wanted to point out are these three key nutrients here, because I tend to see these quite deficient in people with gut issues. So the nutrients that are needed for healthy digestion, it's a lot, right? You could see it's more than just a handful of things. You got B12 and carnitine and choline and magnesium, but the key gut healing factors for me are the glutamine, the zinc, and the vitamin A, specifically related to healing leaky gut. Those cells that line the small intestines that I showed you in the previous diagram are called enterocytes. And so glutamine is an amino acid that helps feed those enterocytes and keeps those barriers intact. And zinc and vitamin A also regulate that epithelial lining, those cells. So again, kind of tying it back to where we get those nutrients in our diet and what foods. I put together this table, and Carrie, I know you'll appreciate this because this is from Chris Masterjohn's work. He's an awesome PhD researcher that Carrie and I follow quite a bit. He's put together a massive amount of research, and I actually utilized a couple different resources, but primarily his work. He looks into where we are really getting these nutrients from, and also kind of putting them in different tiers as far as, you know, you're going to get the most amount from this group of foods and so on and so forth. For the sake of time, I just kind of ordered this. You know, I didn't list out every tier, but I decided to put it into a table. And like, for example, you know, to the glutamine here, you're going to get more of it in bone broth versus what you're going to get in like asparagus or broccoli. So it's ordered from highest to lowest as far as the quantity of that nutrient you're going to find in those top food sources. So, you know, just circling the things again that I showed you on the previous slide, glutamine, that amino acid that's important for healing the gut lining. We definitely give that as a supplement quite a bit, usually in powder form, but bone broth is a great source as well as some of these other sources. Vitamin A and zinc, you're going to get in these food sources. And what jumps out at you guys when you look at this table? And I kind of made it a little obvious by capitalizing it, but liver, right? Liver and other organ meats as well. There's tongue and heart over here, giblets. There's also, there's cod liver oil right there. So organ meats give us a lot of amazing nutrients. And so everything from B vitamins to lots of different minerals. And conversely, there's nutrients that you really can't get from a lot of animal sources, like magnesium you tend to get more from some of these food sources. So whole grains, it's going to depend on what soil they're grown in, and it's all about eating them in balance. You're going to get some nutrients, but they're not going to be rich in a lot of other nutrients. But magnesium you can get from whole grains, seafood definitely, but you do see animal foods kind of like spread out throughout this table, right? And they're usually at the top of the list. And look at liver. But vitamin C, again, mostly plant-based foods, and as well as potassium or plant-based foods is what you're gonna get those nutrients from. But it's kind of a theme. Animal foods are incredibly nutrient dense. And this is just a handful of nutrients that we're looking at related to gut health specifically. And so inflammation is a big topic too. Inflammation, in a nutshell, okay, inflammation happens on an acute level, right? You can cut yourself and your skin gets red and swollen and inflamed, and that's more acute inflammation that you can actually see and feel. But chronic inflammation is very different. You may not see and feel that, and that's happening on more of a systemic level throughout the body. Or maybe it could be localized somewhere in the body and you may not have any obvious symptoms of it. But chronic sort of systemic inflammation is a huge driver behind many conditions: cancer, heart disease, obesity, diabetes. And working on controlling inflammation, again, we could talk for hours about that. Very complex process, and there's many ways to tackle inflammation. It starts, of course, with a whole diet with good quality sourced foods that don't have any toxins in them that create inflammation, but also repleting certain nutrients is important to help control inflammatory processes in the body. And then omega-3s also play an important role in inflammation. So I'll talk for a minute about this whole omega-3 and 6 thing, because there's still a lot of confusion about that. Oftentimes omega-6s kind of get labeled as bad, unhealthy, inflammatory fats, which isn't entirely true. We actually need some omega-6s. And so for the most part, I'm sure you all have heard of, at least, of omega-3 fats. You know, they're important for inflammation, pain, brain health. And we get them from fish and taking fish oil. You can actually get a lot of omega-3s from pasture-raised meats, and I'm going to show you some great studies on that in a minute. But I want you to have this foundational understanding first of this whole balance between omega-3s and 6s. Again, omega-6s aren't necessarily bad. It's having them in a certain ratio with omega-3s. So right here where I have the ideal ratio of 1 to 1, you know, this is tough. I do a lot of omega-3 and 6 testing, and I'll show you that in a minute too. I've never seen a 1-to-1 ratio. I would love to see that. I think it'd be interesting, but the closest ratio I've seen is 2 to 1. Even if I can get people to 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, that's fantastic. But unfortunately, the average American is about 15 to 1. And there's, you know, just to kind of break this down a little further, there's different types of omega-3s, there's different types of omega-6s. And what I specifically want you to kind of focus on is something called the AA to EPA ratio. AA is arachidonic acid. It's a type of omega-6 fat that tends to come from conventionally raised animals that have been given grains and soy. So this type of fat compared to EPA, which is an omega-3 fat, tells us a lot about inflammation in the body. And if you can take a look at this diagram on the right-hand side, you see the AA here, the arachidonic acid, and EPA here. And essentially what they're saying in this graphic is that, you know, too much of this AA, this specific type of omega-6, can promote inflammation and blood clotting and pain and constriction of your blood vessels, maybe leading to hypertension. And then omega-3s help promote anti-inflammatory responses, improve circulation, decrease your pain, relax your blood vessels, can do kind of the opposite. So it's all about this ratio, right? Having these in a certain balance with one another. Now the AA to EPA ratio specifically, we want that at below 5 to 1 is ideal. And so high ratios indicate a lot of inflammation. So there is a sample omega check report that you're seeing now between 2 different patients. Fortunately, we know this specific test isn't available anymore at the lab we were using, but there is a different test that we can use that's actually a little more advanced, so it looks different from this. But this is just an example of someone with low inflammation, high inflammation. If you think back to those ratios that I told you about, right? Omega-6 to 3, this person, pretty good, right? 4.4. It's not that perfect 1 to 1, but I'm really happy with this. Their total omegas are really high, and look at their arachidonic acid to EPA ratio. It's 5.1, so that's pretty good. They have it flagged out of range, but that's because it's just barely above 5. But I'm really happy with this. This is definitely a person that has low inflammation. This person, their omega-3s are extremely low, and look at their arachidonic acid to EPA ratio. It's sky high. This is inflammation city. It's almost 55 to 1, and that should be below 5, right? So their omega-6 to 3 ratio, 18.1 to 1. So that's someone with inflammation. So I started looking into this some more, you know, what contributes to high arachidonic acid. We know food sources of EPA, you know, the fish and some pastured meats, we want to increase the EPA, but we want to find out how to lower the AA, right, that arachidonic acid. So I started looking into food sources of where the arachidonic acid is coming from in the diet. And it turns out that poultry and eggs tend to be a really high source, but it has a lot to do with what that chicken is fed and not, you know, getting access to the pasture, right? So this was a cool little in-house study done by an organization called APA, the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association. I met them at a farming conference in Pennsylvania, and they brought up this study that they did. And I asked them for the raw data on it, but this is published right here on their website, what you're seeing on the right-hand side. And essentially what they looked at, 3 different groups of chickens. They took the chicken breast and they removed the fat, and they sent it off to a lab for analysis on the omega-3 and 6 content. And essentially what you're seeing here, the 3 groups, there's a pasture-raised group of chickens that did not have any soy in their diet. The other group of pasture-raised chickens did have soy as part of their diet, but they still had access to pasture, right? These are actually both from the same farm too, just to kind of control the study a little better. And when it says USDA down here, these were samples they just picked up from the store, from the grocery store, just regular old, you know, chicken breasts that weren't pasture raised or organic. Actually, I think they did have some organic and some non-organic, and then they kind of lumped them together in one group here. Anywho, what you want to look at are these numbers here. So back to that omega-6 to 3 ratio, the no soy group had a pretty darn good ratio. Now I do want to say I'm not an animal nutrition expert, so I don't know what the ideal ratios would really be in an animal, but just kind of comparing it to our ranges for humans. Carrie, you want to mute that person? Thank you. So in the pasture raised no soy group, excellent ratio, right? 3 to 1. And then you could see it's higher, of course, in the group that got soy, a little higher. And then the USDA group, much higher. This is inflammation. And these guys are kind of trending towards inflammation. So I told you I got that raw data that they were kind enough to share with me. Mike Badger from APA sent me that, and I broke it down and looked at it a little further, because I asked them about the AA to EPA average, and they said, what's that? So I looked at that and sent it back to them, and they thought that was really interesting that the soy-free pasture group, again, had a pretty nice ratio. It was under 5. The soy-fed pasture group, though, it's actually almost getting up to the number that the store-bought, the USDA group, was. So we know that soy, the takeaway from this is that soy in chickens' diet does impact their omega-6 and 3 ratio. And this is just a small scale study. We definitely need bigger studies to sort of back this up, but it does actually fall in line with what we've seen with other similar studies when you give animals more grains and soy. So I'm not going to get into the details of this just for the sake of time. I did this more so for farmers so that they understand too how it impacts other animals. But pastured pork, it's kind of the same story. If you have more grain in the diet, it does definitely drive up their omega-6 and 3s. So these were 4 groups of pigs that they looked at. Kind of similar in that these 3 groups right here were all from the same farm. This is John Arbuckle. And for those of you who know about Joel Salatin's work, he was trying to sort of mimic Joel Salatin's style of farming and just offer the pigs a lot of fresh pasture. But they decided to experiment and see what happened when you didn't have that supplemental grain. Because most pastured animals, unless they're ruminants that get solely grass, most pastured animals, chickens, pigs, they have to be supplemented. They need certain amino acids. They can't just survive exclusively on pasture, on grass. So even though it says grain-free, they had to give them a little bit of supplemental milk powder just to give them the necessary amino acids. So they still kind of needed something to supplement their diet in addition to the pasture. But anyway, this is a store-bought group that was not, of course, from John's farm. And this is the omega-6 to 3 ratio that you're looking at the bottom here of this table. And again, store-bought group, almost 30 to 1. It's extremely high. 13.84 for his pastured pork that were 100% grain-fed. And then 50% grain. Now they did get a little bit of pasture, just to kind of clarify. They got a little bit of pasture. They just weren't rotated around on fresh pasture like these 2 groups. But 50% grain, a lower ratio, and then the guys that are grain-free had the lowest ratio of all. But it's not always cost-effective for farmers. The grain-free group incurred the greatest costs and took the longest to finish. So the 50% grain-fed group resulted in lowest costs. So this is actually most cost-effective for the farmer, and it's better for the animal's health and then our health. So it's kind of like finding that middle ground between not being totally purist and grain-free, but also you obviously don't want the store-bought pork. So, and then looking at beef, this is a larger study that was actually published in the British Journal of Nutrition. And I think this study is absolutely fascinating, and it's a two-part study. So the first part, they looked at, again, similar to the other studies, they just assessed the omega-6s and 3s in grass-fed beef versus conventional. And they use different terms in the UK. They have grass-fed and they say concentrate, which basically means conventional beef or factory farm beef. So the total omega-6s are higher, you know, in the conventional groups versus the grass-fed groups. The omega-6s are higher. The omega-3s were lower in the conventional group, and they're higher in the grass-fed. So grass-fed animals have much higher omega-3s. Right here, it's almost twice as much with the steaks that they assessed, the grass-fed group, 59.16, and in the conventional group, 36.2, so significantly higher omega-3s. And here's the ratios here at the bottom that I kind of highlighted in blue. So the omega-6 to 3 ratio in the grass-fed group, 2.29. That's excellent. And here it's 8.39 for the conventional group. So almost an 8-to-1 ratio, a little over 8-to-1 ratio. And mince means ground beef. So again, really beautiful ratio, 1.73 for the grass-fed group, and in the conventional group, 6.78. So the ratios we see are much better as far as the omega-3s and 6s. And the other part of this study, which I love, is that they actually assessed the 0.6-0.3 ratios in human study subjects. So they had 38 human study subjects, 18 people ate grass-fed beef for 4 weeks, 4-week-long study. 20 people had conventional beef. They made sure before the study that nobody was eating a lot of fish or taking fish oil, so there's no confounding factors or variables, and the omega-6 to 3 ratios were measured at baseline and then after 4 weeks post-intervention. So what do we see in humans when they eat grass-fed beef? Well, this is the omega-6 to 3 ratio at baseline for the grass-fed group, 9.18, and post-intervention, 6.21. So it went down, which is what we want to see, right? We want to get that ratio as close to 1-to-1 as possible. So that ratio looked great compared to where it was 4 weeks ago. And in the group that ate the conventional beef, what happened with them? At baseline is 8.2, post-intervention, 12.87. So essentially the grass-fed group had a 30% improvement in their omega-6 to 3 ratio, and the conventional group had a 50% worse ratio. It increased by 50%, and that's bad. We don't want that number to go up. So that was very telling as far as looking at what's actually happening in humans as you're changing their diet. And this is a very similar study. This was brought to my attention by Fred Provenza. So I told you we'd come back to talking about Fred. So Fred is a researcher originally from Colorado, like myself, and he wrote this book called Nourishment: What Animals Can Teach Us About Rediscovering Our Nutritional Wisdom. So again, one of my all-time most beloved and favorite books. Everyone should definitely read this at some point if you care about nourishment and nutrition and all these topics we're talking about, because he really does an amazing job of tying it all together and talking about how studying, the herbivore behavior like he did, how animals can teach us about trying to become more intuitive about our eating, which is hard. Humans are very disconnected from intuitive eating and knowing what we need, but animals somehow know, what they need all the time. And so that's what his book is primarily about. But what Fred also brought to my attention was this really fascinating study. And I borrowed this slide from his presentation that he often gives when he talks about, the differences in, eating pastured meat versus traditional meat. And with this study, I'm trying to remember where exactly it was published. I think it was, it took place in Australia, of course. It was kangaroo meat that they looked at, but I think it was actually published in the British Journal of Nutrition as well. But what they did, they looked at human study subjects again, and they measured what's called postprandial inflammatory response, meaning they looked at inflammation markers in their blood after they ate certain meats, okay? So they looked at their inflammation markers before and after, and what they found with 2 different groups of people, one eating wild meat, which was the kangaroo meat, and then the other group eating cattle that were fed high grain, they found those inflammation markers were much higher actually in the grain-fed cattle group. So Fred and I have both commented, and he's actually reached out to those researchers that they need to do another study and compare like beef to beef, look at the same animals. But essentially we can see that meat, from wild animals, didn't cause the same reaction that it did in the group of people that were fed the Wagyu beef, the grain-fed group. So they said indicative of low-grade systemic immune reaction when compared with the lean game meat. So, there's this set of, the immune system reactions that happen too in the body in response to inflammation. So anyone with, immune system challenges and autoimmune diseases, again, gut issues, which is tied into the immune system. You got to be thinking about this, what different meats are doing to your body. It's not just about the plant foods. It is absolutely about the quality of that beef and that pork and that chicken and eggs. So also there's, you know, more I can say about the other nutrients, the omega-3 and 6. I know we talked a lot about that. That gets the most attention, and Fred and I have also discussed that there needs to be a lot more research on assessing other nutrients in grass-fed beef compared to conventional beef. And there is more research on its way. So Fred Provenza is working with some other researchers on looking at phytochemical richness of meat, which was something new to me, because when you hear the term phyto, that means plant. And I said, well, there can't really be phytochemicals in meat, because that's, you know, that's only something you're derived from plants. But if animals are eating a phytochemically rich diet, some of those phytochemicals will wind up in their tissues and can get stored in the fats. And so that's that we get in turn get those amazing nutrients that the animals are eating if they're eating a wild diet. But we have seen in some studies that grass-fed beef is definitely richer in antioxidants, higher in vitamin E, beta carotene, minerals like calcium. We talked about the omega-3 differences, conjugated linoleic acid, and that has a lot of protective effects, especially cancer. So we have seen in some studies there are other health benefits, of course, just beyond the omega-3 and 6 content. And dairy as well, just to kind of give a little breakdown on that. Grass-fed dairy nutrition versus conventional dairy. I know we didn't talk about dairy a whole lot, but you know, at the very beginning when I said the USDA recommended, you know, low-fat or fat-free dairy, and I'm always trying to tell patients, no, you want the fat if it's from a good quality source, because the fat is what tends to store a lot of the nutrients. So full fat is really what you want. You know, whole milk, you know, the yogurt you want whole, all of that should be whole and not low fat or fat free. And again, it is richer in a lot of these nutrients that you're seeing here. Just going to kind of go through these a little more because I'm not sure where we're at with time. I get this question all the time, you know, about what about the plant-based meats, right? And you guys, I hope, have a good understanding of how the plant-based meats are not ideal for your health just because of the environmental impacts that I talked about with the greenhouse gas emissions. But as far as like the impact on your health specifically, they are not nutrient dense the way meats are, okay? And I think this is just a funny little comic, you know, kids asking if we can make hamburgers. We can make hamburgers out of vegetables, so why can't we have broccoli made out of ground beef? You know, it's not about either or. We really want all the different, the variety of all the different foods, all the different nutrients that all those foods offer. But plant-based food is, these plant-based burgers, rather, I should say specifically, are very processed. And these are ingredient lists. These are 3 different ingredient lists here. Again, I wish we could do a little chat thing. I can't figure out how to get the chat screen up while I'm sharing the screen. But I usually like to have people guess at which ingredient list here is for plant-based burgers versus dog food. We have 3 different lists of ingredients, and they all look kind of similar in some ways, right? But essentially, over here you have ingredients for Beyond Meat. Over here you have ingredients for Impossible Burger, and this is the dog food. And I actually feel like the dog food might be one of the healthier ones out of all 3. Impossible Burger makes no secret of the fact that they use genetically modified ingredients, and they kind of boast about it on their website. So soy protein, it's absolutely GMO, and the like hemoglobin is incredibly, this is the ingredients that gives it that effect that it's like meat, looks like it's bleeding. It's pretty gross, you know, how processed this is just to get it to look like meat and to try to taste like meat. But you know, these are all things I discourage just about everybody from eating, but most importantly, people with autoimmune issues or gut issues. You know, this is not real nourishment, right? This isn't whole food. This is processed food. And this is just a quick little slide on the plant-based meat, high cost, less nutrition. When you do the comparison of nutrients from the plant-based offerings at the fast food locations versus the meat-based option, I mean, they cost more, and then on top of that, you're actually getting less nutrition. But marketing is a very powerful thing, and people will pay more for something that's less nutritious and maybe even less tasty, just because they think it's better for their health and the environment. And you guys will have these slides if you want to look at all that in more detail. I really want to just review this for just a couple minutes. This is a very, very powerful infographic. I just recently discovered this one. Force of Nature just sent this one to me. So again, this is from Force of Nature Meats. And I'll give you their website at the end so you can check out more from them on their website. This really breaks down the issue with labeling, okay? You know, you're in the store, right? And you're like, what do I get? Is it grass-fed, 100% grass-fed? Where's this regenerative meat? You know, where am I gonna find regenerative meat? You're not gonna really see that on any labels unless you're really buying it from very specific farms, like some of the farms that are partnered with Force of Nature. And a few other farms too are getting better about using this term regenerative. But essentially, what you're looking at here in this table, they're saying sustainable is not good enough. We kind of have to get away from that term and go for more of the term regenerative. We want to regenerate our soil, our ecosystems. We want to regenerate the nutrition in our food and our health. At the bottom here, they have plant-based meats and conventional meats. And you can see they call it degenerative. Degenerative meaning it's degrading wildlife habitats and depleting our soil. And, you know, if you think back to that list of ingredients, you know, all that processed stuff in these plant-based meats, they're coming from these industrialized monoculture farms, and they're emitting more greenhouse gas emissions. They're, again, degrading soil health because they come from big factory farms like this. And they call it plant-based desert. You know, this is a soybean field. You don't have any diversity here. You're not restoring soil health. You're not sequestering carbon. That's where these plant-based meats are coming from. So they're high in soy-based hormones. Some of them don't use soy, but they're still using, you know, pea protein and those type of things. It's similar. It's coming from these type of industrial farms. Conventional beef, of course, we know how bad that is. They're being fed corn and soy, same type of deal, degrading environments. Then you have organic and grass-fed. Now, this is where it gets a little controversial because they kind of have it under the degenerative group. And I know what some of you are probably thinking, like, well, wait, so grass-fed is supposed to be healthy. Okay, then, you know, I know some of you, I specified, okay, it has to be 100% grass-fed, right? And then you're like, well, wait, it can't even just be 100% grass-fed. It has to be regenerative. And honestly, at the end of the day, you just have to do the best you can. There's always going to be a greater financial cost to some of these better quality meats, and they're not always as easily accessible. So if you're eating organic and grass-fed, you know, it is going to be better than these options. However, it's important to understand that organic and grass-fed, what that means, it doesn't always mean they were grazed in this manner on the land. It could be something like this, or maybe they're just like in a big dirt lot and they kind of drop down some hay, and they might give them a little bit of corn and soy to kind of supplement that hay, which is essentially grass, right? Or they'll give them some alfalfa. You know, they'll just kind of give them food in a feedlot type setting. They're not on the pasture. This is still bad for the habitat. This is still not sequestering carbon, right? This is not ideal either, but unfortunately, some of the trickery that's happening within the food system and within, you know, what you're seeing pop up in the supermarket is organic and grass-fed isn't always what it seems. So ultimately, at the end of the day, to really guarantee you're getting good quality product, you're getting something that's 100% grass-fed and more so regenerative, you got to know your farmer. You know, you got to build relationships with your farmers, and most of my patients already know where to source a lot of those type of meats from, and if you don't know that, you know, I need to have that conversation next with you. But it's all about a process, right? Because some people are coming in and they've been eating just totally processed stuff, and it's quite a transition to take someone from eating conventional beef to organic, grass-fed to more of this type of meat that's even higher quality. So knowing your farmer, how they're raising that animal. We have a few great farms around here. Clark's Farm is fantastic, and Mary's Lynn's Farm is another one. Carrie, there's another one. I know the name of it. You've told me about them. I think it's like Copper Kensington. Yes, thank you.
And
them as
Copper
well.
Penny as well.
Yep. So we have a few great farms here in this area. And there's other farms you can purchase from online as well that we could talk about if you guys have questions about that. But just one final little clarification. So 100% grass-fed, there can still be the potential for overgrazing, okay? So lack of planning resulting in unintended damage to soil health. But if something's regenerative, if that farmer is talking about, you know, holistic planned grazing is a term used quite a bit. You know, if there's some kind of planned holistic grazing that focuses on building soil health, then we know that that's a better quality product. And asking your farmer about their soil, I think, is one of the number one things that you can do is, you know, what are you doing for your soil health? And a farmer should be able to kind of give some sort of answer to that as far as what they're doing with their animals and how they're grazing them. But either way, this is really what we want to be transitioning towards. If it's not perfectly 100% regenerative all the time, you know, that's the more the long-term goal, but at least get to this point where you're doing more grass-fed. But the takeaway is when you go into the supermarket and you see Giant's brand of, you know, whatever grass-fed, it's probably coming from this type of factory farm setting where it's not truly pastured, okay? And ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, when it comes to the plant-based meat versus the, you know, grass-fed stuff, do you want lab-created meat or do you want nature-created meat? You know, where do you really want your meat to originate from at the end of the day? Where do you want it to come from? And that is actually a picture from Impossible Labs. I got that off online. These are some other resources, just real quickly. I'll go through these. Eatwild.com, Jo Robinson, she's a great resource. This book is awesome. She doesn't really talk about animal protein, though, in Eating on the Wild Side. This is just more focused on, you know, heirloom variety of different plant foods. But her website has much more information about the differences on grass-fed beef and all the health benefits and other pasture-raised animals. These are other organizations that are leading the way in soil regeneration and, you know, speaking this language of regenerative agriculture and talking about managed grazing, holistic managed grazing. And what I would encourage you to do is maybe, you know, pick a few of these organizations, go online, just look at their websites, donate, share that information with other people, sign up for their newsletter at the very least to learn more and just get, you know, some constant steady information about what's happening in this field so that you can support this movement even more. And we have Carl, my dear friend Carl, with us on the call tonight, and he founded this organization, Soil for Climate, with his friend Seth. And so if you guys have like specific questions about grazing or soil, I'm not the expert on that, but maybe Carl can answer some questions. So I wanted to close with one of my favorite quotes by, again, one of my most treasured heroes, Wendell Berry. No matter how urban our life, our bodies live by farming. We come from the earth and return to it, and so we live in agriculture as we live in flesh. While we live, our bodies are moving particles of the earth, joined inextricably, both to the soil and to the bodies of other living creatures. It is hardly surprising then that there should be some profound resemblances between our treatment of our bodies and our treatment of the earth. And that's it. You guys will have some information on references. And I don't know if you guys want to ask some questions.
Sarah, there is a question from Paul. Has the rumination system been studied as to how it increases ozone?
Oh my God. I might be a question for
No, omega-3, not
Oh.
ozone.
Oh, I was like ozone.
O3 is okay.
O6 and O3 is what we've been talking about, right?
Yeah, so say the question again. Has the rumination system been studied as to how it increases O3? Is that what you're asking, omega-3s?
Well, the big difference is that if you eat grain, you're bypassing the rumination system, right? It seems to me that that's somewhat of a key factor, don't you think? The rumination system itself, or is it just the food?
I think, well, my understanding is just that the grasses are just so rich in the omega-3s that's what's greatly inflating that. That's what's increasing the omega-3s. And if you're giving them
That's the
grain,
source.
right, yeah. And sorry if I didn't clarify that. They're getting, and we're of course not ruminants. We don't have that special stomach design to get those omega-3s from grass. So that's why it's kind of funny when, people are doing wheatgrass shots and things like that. You might be getting chlorophyll and some other nutrients from those type of things, but you're not going to get the omega-3s. You're not going to be able to really digest that food the way a ruminant animal can. But yeah, that's where they're getting the omega-3s from, is primarily.
I thought they know they have 4 stomachs, right? I thought maybe there was something special there. Okay, never mind. Thank you.
Sure. Do you want to go
Hey,
through
Sarah,
that?
Georgia, can I chime in?
Hi, Georgia.
I loved it. I thought this was really interesting.
Awesome.
I have a really quick question for you, which is just, if I wanted to go and explain to my friends about high nutrient density, my question really is there such a thing as overburdening of the nutrients, and how do we know that? Like, how do you appropriately determine nutrient density?
That's a really good question. And so there's certain things that come to mind when I think of that, like you think about liver, right? And it's really nutrient dense, and you can actually too much liver and start to kind of get a toxic amount of vitamin A, but it would really take a lot to do that. And Carrie might know a little more of this about me because she is also like the organ meat queen. She eats all the time and prepares it in like a cajillion different ways. And I know Chris Masterjohn talks about like not having more than, I have to look up his specific recommended servings of liver per week. So
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that Terry Walls recommends about 12 ounces of liver per week, no more than that due to the vitamin A concern and iron overload.
Yeah, and Terry Walls, yeah, she talks a lot about nutrient density, of course, too. And she has a pretty intense protocol, eating like 3 cups of this group of vegetable and 3 cups of that group of vegetable. And like you're eating 9 cups of vegetables a day, plus eating, good quality meat, and plus all these healthy fats. And it just seems like so much food. So, the micronutrient test kind of guides me the most in how to help people figure out where they might have too much or too little of something. It's not a perfect test. No test is, but it's the best tool that I have to really assess somebody's nutrient status. And Carrie, I think it was you who ate like organ meat and oysters just about every day, and your zinc went up a lot into a good range.
Yeah, in fact, most of my deficiencies, both borderline and functional, went away after 6 months of just hammering at canned smoked oysters and eating liver and heart. So it really worked.
Yeah, it was really cool. So she was, and you like got rid of or greatly minimized your supplementation, I think.
I stopped all supplements except for vitamin D. And then I added back in vitamin B6 because I found that no matter how much liver I eat, I can't seem to get my vitamin B6 up. And that's something you would only know if you were doing micronutrient testing. But I've been able to greatly minimize supplementation. I was taking maybe 10, 12 things before. Now I'm taking 2 or 3.
Yeah, and same here. I mean, it goes through phases. If people might go through a really severe time of stress, and then you really need to crank up your nutrient density because your body is going to deplete a lot of things. And I see that a lot when I test people after a really intense period of stress. They're wiped out. And then that's when supplements can really be extremely helpful to repleting things right away. Because the reality is, most people are gonna be like Carrie and eat like a can of oysters every day and organ meat every day to really get that zinc up to where it needs to be, along with some of those other nutrients. So it's kind of hard to answer that question because it's testing gives us insights, and that's why retesting is important too. It's not just like a one-time test. As all my patients on here know, I'm really diligent about reminding everyone, okay, it's about 6 months, let's try to test again. And then I just had my 8th test done. So every 6 months I get my testing done too to figure out, where I need to work on in improving my diet and getting that nutrient density balance. But yeah, there's some nutrients that can become a little toxic, if that's kind of your question too. You have to just.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you definitely answered it. I think the testing, I think, really helps to figure out whether you're in balance or not. So that's probably what I was looking for. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. We'll get you tested soon. I know we talked about that.
Exactly.
What's the specific name of that test?
So that is the SpectraCell micronutrient test. So that's a lab. They're based in Houston, and I was gonna try to show it again to you real quick. So yeah, so it's a blood test, and we're trying, obviously everything with COVID, we had to put our draw site on hold, of course, but I'm gonna talk to our phlebotomist soon and see if we can get that going again. We usually run a draw site here every couple weeks, and have a phlebotomist come out, draw a group of people, and it takes, a couple weeks for the results to come back, typically 2 to 3 weeks. And this is actually looking at your nutrient status kind of over an average of the last 6 months. That's why we say kind of get it done every 6 months. It's looking at your white blood cells, and it's a very specialized, what they call a functional test, because it's very complicated to explain, but essentially what they're doing is analyzing the function of your cells over several weeks to see how they function with and without certain nutrients, and that's how they estimate your level of deficiency. So like this person here is very deficient in B12, anything in the red is a functional deficiency. And we definitely, when people are pretty compliant with their diet and supplements, I almost always see good changes. So it's important to test and retest, but that's the SpectraCell test. Is there another question? I see.
Yep,
Okay,
we have one more here from Dave. The high level of chronic disease would indicate that most are not close to nutrient overload. SpectraCell is also useful in this regard, but more of a comment than a question.
Yeah. Yep, and I would agree that I think, I'm actually glad you said that because I had it in mind to say that. It's more likely you're going to see a deficiency than an overload of a nutrient. It's incredibly rare that I get those test results back and I'm like, whoa, you're like off the charts in vitamin A. Cut back on the liver. I don't really see that. Even sometimes with supplementation, I don't really see going overboard. But that's why you got to balance. You got to balance it out. I always tell patients it's a dance with the supplements. You have to kind of take this supplement for a while, increase this food in your diet for a while. Let's see what changes. And then maybe we need to cut back on the nutrient, but you're a little deficient in this other nutrient now. So it's always this dance and a bit of a balancing act. At the end of the day, I don't love supplements. Like I don't like the idea that we have to get nutrition out of a capsule from a bottle. I would love to believe we can get it all from food alone, but we know our food is so deficient, right? Up to a 90% deficiency in certain nutrients with certain foods is what, came from that one slide from Force of Nature. So a lot of our food is very deficient, so we just really can't get it from food alone anymore. And especially when you consider we're bombarded with so much these days with toxin overload in our environment, and our livers have to work a lot harder. Our bodies have to work a lot harder to try to detox, to heal, to repair things, to keep us just going and fight all these other aspects of a very unnatural modern society. We have more toxins in our environment than we've ever had in the history of humankind. So that's going to deplete us even further, essentially. And then add stress to that on top of it. And then we keep depleting. I see, Erin, can you repeat where to buy the good meats in our area? Absolutely. I think I'll just pull up. There's actually one really great resource I'd love to share with all of you guys. And again, most of my patients in the group already know about this. Let's see. I should probably I'm going to get you this email here real quick. 1000ecofarms.com is the website. And let's see, here we go. My friend Liz Reitzig, she runs that group, and I will put her email in the chat if you want to send her an email to sign up for her buying club. Let me share the screen with you here. So this is, and have I talked to you about her, Carrie? About Liz's buying group?
I don't think so.
Okay, so she's wonderful. Liz has been at this for a long time, and all the farmers know who she is. She put together this buying club where essentially you go online. There's no fee to join the club. You just go online and pick out everything that you want. You can shop by farmer, and she's very meticulous about sourcing and quality. She totally gets regenerative agriculture. I think it's somewhere in the statement here about her club and what it's all about. She mentions regenerative agriculture, but you can shop by product type or by the farm itself if you go to suppliers. And you buy everything online, you pay for it online, and then you go to a local drop point. I think the most local drop point for us is Catonsville. And so it's a little far for some people, so I've talked to some patients about maybe forming a different buying club or a different drop point rather. But you can shop by farm. Clark's Farm is in Clarksville. I don't think she partners with Mary's Lynn's farm, but that's another farmer nearby in Clarksville. I don't think she has Huntington here. She goes all over though, to Virginia, to Pennsylvania. She has probably close to 1,000 customers in the DC area alone. So she, this is what she does. You shop and order everything online, and she goes all around to the farmers and picks it up and drops it off at the drop point for you to pick up. So you don't even have to go to the farm or the store. Obviously, it's wonderful if you can go out to the farm from time to time and connect with them, meet your farmer. But this is a great, easy way to shop for things, especially with social distancing and staying home. So then you don't even have to go to the store. Oakham Farm, they have really great pork. Sometimes they don't have a lot of things available. It just depends. So that's a great resource. I put her email in the chat. You can just send her an email, let her know we sent you, and she'll get you added to the list. And all you do is pay a small delivery fee, and that's how that works. And yeah, what I want to form, I have a guide that I have on food sourcing, for our area. And then I also have, I could actually, and Carrie, if you want to have this as part of the thing you send to everybody, let me show you guys this real quick. Food quality and sourcing. I just revamped it recently because I tried to take out a few things. When it comes to eggs, I used to say there were a couple brands in the store that I liked, like Vital Farms was one of them. Unfortunately, they give their chickens soy. Now, I'll buy Vital Farms over, any whole regular dozen of eggs, of course. But I would rather have soy-free eggs. And through Liz's buying club, you can actually, she does have soy-free eggs, and they're really good. But Vital Farms, I kind of took them off my list of suppliers for pasture raised eggs. They are pasture raised, they're GMO free, but they're not soy free. But this is a sourcing guide on just what labels to look for. So again, 100% grass fed is ideal. I'd much rather you go to the farm than have to go to the store. But if you're going to go to the store, at least look for these things on the labels. Wild meats. Here's some sourcing on that. I'm a huge fan of Force of Nature, of course. The only downside is I don't like the fact that it's not local. It's expensive shipping, and it's just, to me, it doesn't feel right buying something from all the way across the country that has all this packaging that I have to just throw away or recycle. So I'm still going to support my local farms as much as I can, but I do love what they're doing, and I do buy from them from time to time. So there's different places online, you can purchase from, and I listed out sourcing tips here. So local farms, Mary's Lynn Farm, Clark's Farm, Carrie, I have to add your 2 farms on here. And this would be a good guide for you guys too. Our favorite local health food stores, and then again, the online farms.
Sarah, have you been to Moms recently?
It's been a couple weeks since I've been.
Their meat program is outstanding right now. It's better than it's ever been. I guess because of availability, they've had to really go local, like hyper local. And so they're bringing in some amazing beef, lamb, chicken, pork. I got some amazing organic pastured chicken livers yesterday for $2.99 a pound. I mean, it's just,
oh, wow.
It's better than it's ever been. And they have some soy-free eggs there. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on Nature's Yolk brand, because that's the soy-free eggs that they have. What do you know about them?
Oh, I'd have to look. I didn't know they had soy-free.
Yeah, it's new.
Oh, okay, so that's a new one. All right, cool. And I like the term that you use, like they're going hyper local.
Yeah.
So yeah,
They're always local, but it's even more local
it's even
now.
more local. Yeah. I did notice that when I was in there a couple weeks ago. I got some ground beef that I figured I'd try, and I didn't go online yet to look at the farm, but I wanted to check them out. But yeah, I didn't. I mean, if they're soy free, that's awesome. The Nature's Yoke brands. Yeah, I know what the packaging looks like. Okay, I see. Yeah, I'll have to add them maybe to my list as one of the ones it might be. Is this it, Carrie? It's hard to see
Yep,
that
that's
picture.
right.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's always a little tricky to tell though, because some of these guys are still, pretty commercial, and it's always a little questionable, I think, to me, once they start to scale up a little bit. Are they still maintaining, that integrity of this, at the same level that the small scale farmers are? So, but yeah, as far as like, if you're gonna get your eggs from the store, right, this is Carrie found a soy-free one.
All right, any last questions, anybody?
Carl, do you want to chime in? And give a shout out for soil.
Sure. Great job, Sarah. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words. Um, the focus of the organization that I co-founded is, of course, the climate benefits of agriculture. And I point out that unlike any other industry, all of which have to cut emissions, agriculture can go truly beyond that and not only get down to zero emissions, but really take it in the negative direction. And it's not just about getting the carbon out of the air, but it's about restoring the wildlife habitat. It's about replenishing dried up lakes and rivers, all around the world. The western half of the United States, in many cases, is turning to desert because of lack of adequate grazing. So I would just push back against, the commonly heard arguments that we don't have enough land for grazing, or grazing is harmful for wildlife or for the bird populations. In fact, National Audubon 3 years ago started their conservation ranching program as a way specifically to address the decline in songbird populations. And now approximately 2 million acres across the United States are being grazed in a way to restore the habitat for the songbirds. So I guess I'll close with that.
You call that conservation ranching, right?
That's their name for it.
Yep. So, and is that Blue Nest?
Blue Nest beef, and they sell it by mail order. That's correct.
Yeah, I need to add them to my list. I haven't gotten them on that list is really old. I need to do so much more revamping to it. So I'll try to make those changes before Carrie sends it out to you guys. So yeah, Carl has been a friend of mine for years now, and they have an awesome Facebook group, Soil for Climate, Soil, the number 4 climate, just like you saw in the logo. If you want to go on Facebook and join that group, there's a lot of great discussions. You will learn so much. It's, everyone, researchers, farmers, ranchers, consumers, all interacting and learning from each other. And yeah, so go check out their group. I think we missed a couple questions, and Carl might know this. Grazing areas contaminated with glyphosate. Do you know much about that, Carl? As far as Paul asked, are grazing areas contaminated with glyphosate? And I think that is something that comes up with some farms.
In general, not.
Okay.
The point of grazing is that you want to have as much biomass, not just grass, but forbs and what flowers and so forth. So using an herbicide like glyphosate sort of defeats the purpose. In some cases, in order for the meat to be organic, which many grass-fed farmers are, you wouldn't be permitted to use glyphosate anyway.
And maybe Paul can clarify, but I was thinking he was suggesting that contamination can happen from nearby farms, I guess, either through water, rain, whatever. I didn't know if that was, I know I talked to Joel Saladin, and I don't know if you guys know who he is. He's world famous farmer. He's actually nearby in Virginia. He's been featured in Food Inc., the documentary, and the Omnivore's Dilemma. I've asked him, I've gone to his farm and I've interviewed him and asked him, and he said his land has been tested several times for glyphosate, and there's no traces of glyphosate, despite that there are surrounding farmers that do use glyphosate on their lands and whatnot, or it's rain contamination. There's always that concern, but
Yeah, I know Carrie had mentioned overspray issues with oats, for example. So, but Carl, you clear that up. Thank you. It doesn't make any sense to use it. You're right.
Right. And then Erin just had a question too, I think we'd missed. She said she wants to learn more about how to buy, cook, prepare liver. Can we do some sort of class about that? And yeah, me and Carrie did a really fun class. I think it was like last year, Carrie, or the year before, on organ meats and how to prepare them and delicious ways to cook them. And I made all my patients come that hate organ meats, and they loved it. So at least for the most part, they liked it. At least the pate. The pate always turns out really good. So yeah, there's always just a really quick suggestion around that. Let's see, force. I got to pull these guys up real quick because we got to at least end on this. Force of Nature, just to give them a shout out. I'll share my screen here in a moment. They're so kind, and they've been so gracious with giving me tons of graphics to use for my PowerPoint, because I'm a busy practitioner. I don't have time to put together all those amazing diagrams and graphics. But this is their website. Again, you can see that some of the diagrams I used for my presentation. So if you want to share this information with people, this is just a great little resource to see those visuals. You can share my presentation, of course. What I wanted to point out regarding the organ meats, though, this is their ancestral blend. What that means is it's actually ground liver and ground heart, ground up with the ground beef. And so for those of you that are a little squeamish about liver and you don't know how to prepare it and you're not ready to do that yet, start with this. This is what I start a lot of my patients on. This blend in particular is very mild on the organ meat flavor, because it's only about 10% organ meat. And I've actually requested if they can do something that's a little more concentrated, because I don't think that's super concentrated, but it's a great way to ease people into organ meats. Carl, you remember when we were on the previous webinar, some of the farmers, and they were saying, Alan, I think, uses 30%, which is what my butcher did up in Pennsylvania when I lived there. He did 30%. And then I asked him to kick it up to 50% organ meat and 50% ground beef. And that's, you can use that not just to make burgers, but it's great if you want to put it in like a curry, something that's going to mask the flavor a little more if you don't really like the organ meat taste. Carl, of course, the liverwurst, a lot of people actually really love liverwurst. So, and pates. So those are great ways to ease into organ meats. But Carrie and I, we should do another class on organ meats again. I would love that, especially heart. Carrie's the queen with that, man. She's like, I don't know how you do beef liver. She takes a whole beef and what, you devein it? And
Are you talking about the heart?
Yeah, it's like yours a beef heart.
Yeah, it's surgery for sure. It's worth it though. It's delicious. It has the texture, I think, more of a muscle meat versus an organ. So it's a better gateway organ to try.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I say, if you could find chicken hearts, that they're really mild too, versus just jumping into liver. It's kind of like a little bit of a cross between liver and the meat, like Carrie's saying. It doesn't have quite of that gamey, livery taste. And heart is so nutrient dense in CoQ10, and a lot of similar nutrients to liver. So, all right. Did we answer everybody's questions? Did you guys get the whole connection between ecosystem health and, learning about your choices, your buying choices, and how they really impact all of that? You are a very powerful driver in supporting farmers and supporting the regenerative agriculture movement. And don't just keep this information for yourself. Share this with as many people as possible. This isn't about our health alone. This is about the planet's health at this point. It is truly that important if we can grow this regenerative agriculture movement even more. So share this with as many people as you can, and make it a conversation as often as you can. And we can really grow this movement and support our farmers, because they're our healers at the end of the day.
Frank and I just want to say thank you. It was excellent.
Oh, good. Thank you, Judy. I'm so glad you came. And Judy is she's amazing when it comes to food quality. You already know so much of this, so I'm glad to see you here, still eager to learn more. And I mean, Judy, I just want to ask, for someone like yourself that knows so much about good food quality, did you still feel like you learned some extra?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I loved it. I wanted to ask one other question.
Yeah.
I had an email saying that the video would be available tomorrow. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Carrie,
And would we be able to like send that video to family and friends? Is it?
I'm okay with it. I mean, Carrie, Lynn.
Yeah, it'll definitely be available. Whether or not it can be circulated free of cost will be up to Lynn.
Because let us know, because that the whole this recording is, you know, fantastic, and I'd be willing to, you know, pay for it to be able to send it out to some family and friends.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback, and it is about getting the message out at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll let you know, especially when we send all the other
Okay.
resources and everything. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah.
Sarah, real quick,
Uh-huh.
you connected a lot of dots, or there are a lot of things that you connected that didn't make sense to me before. So this was excellent in that regard, not only just in content. So
Awesome. Was that
excellent.
Paul?
Yes,
Thank you, Paul.
thank you.
That's what it's about, like connecting the dots, like I said, you know, making it all make sense. What do the omega-3s mean? What is regenerative agriculture? Why does soil matter? What are all the labels on the different meats, and what does that actually mean? So ultimately, get to know your farmer and make them your true healer. And we need to get behind them as much as possible.
Thank you, Sarah, for all you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
Deb,
This is great.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
you're welcome. I'm so happy.